This morning, our verse we'll be looking at is Proverbs 22 and verse 6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. As we look at this verse, I think frequently probably the place that's most as far as misquoted is thinking that, it's a hard and fact rule that if we train up a child in the right way, that they're going to stay in it, because everybody has a heart and we don't necessarily know how they're always going to react to things. And so even though we may do our best, doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to stay in that way, even though generally that's going to be the case. I mean, we can look in the Old Testament and look at the kings of Israel. I mean, we see cases where there are good kings that lead to bad kings, and bad kings that lead to good kings. And so while this verse is generally true, it's not always true. So as we think about the book of Proverbs and where this verse is located, it's in a section of the Old Testament which we would consider wisdom literature. And as we think about trying to think about wisdom, there's a saying that says data plus organization is information. Information plus experience creates knowledge. Knowledge plus insight provides wisdom. And so as we think about wisdom literature in the Old Testament, it provides us with knowledge and insights to help us gain wisdom in things that will lead for godly living. Now, the three books in the Old Testament that are considered wisdom literature are Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. And it's been said that Proverbs teaches us things about things that are generally true, while Ecclesiastes and Job often speak of some of the exceptions. In Job, we explore human suffering. In Ecclesiastes, the vanity of worldly pursuits. As we think about the book of Proverbs, it's generally attributed to Solomon. And Solomon was a very, very wise man. It says in 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 29 through 32, and God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure and breadth of mind, like the sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, Kolkol, and Darda, the son of Mahol, and his fame was in the surrounding nations. He also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. As we think about Solomon's wisdom, it was given to him by God. God came to Solomon, and he was told he could ask for anything, and we see here in 1 Kings 3, 9 through 13, Solomon answered, "Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this your great people?" It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this, and God said to him, "Because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, behold, I now do according to your word. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare with you all your days. And if you walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days." So as we look at the book of Proverbs, it's kind of broken up into two sections. Chapters 1 through 9, we see long discourses from a father and a mother to a child. And as we pick up in chapter 10 through 31, we just see many other proverbs through the rest of the book of Proverbs. Would someone like to read Proverbs 1, 1 through 9? Proverbs 1 through 9.
Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase learning, and a man of understanding will attain wise counsel. To understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. My son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother, for they will be a graceful ornament on your head and chains about your neck.
All right. So we see here in this book, the objective for Solomon was to help provide wisdom in trying to seek righteousness and justice and equity, and trying to teach that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Now, Proverbs express ideas commonly accepted as true. They do not argue for the truth of a statement or nuance. Proverbs can state an insight, make an observation, or offer advice in the form of an admonition or prohibition. Certain proverbs are always true, while others do not teach a universally valid truth. Proverbs direct one toward that behavior most likely to produce beneficial results, all things being equal. So as we look at Proverbs 11:1, fraudulent scales are an abomination to Jehovah, but an accurate weight brings his favor. So here's an example of a proverb that is always true. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger, Proverbs 15:1. And this is an example of Proverbs that's usually true. There are some people that you can give them a soft answer and it's not going to turn away wrath. Generally, this will work, but it's not always universally true. And so it is with the Proverbs. We're going to see that there's some that are very always true and some that are usually true. So as we look back at our verse this morning, train up a child in the way he shall go. Even when he's old, he will not depart from it. We're just going to try to take this section by section and kind of think through this verse. So as we think of train up a child, the Hebrew word here that's used for train is often, in a couple other places, it's used in speaking of like the dedication of the temple. As we think about trying to train up a child, God has entrusted us with the life of a child in our lives, trying to direct their heart. We only have them for a short period under our direction, and we're trying to help them come to know God and his path and helping them to learn that. And one of the things, too, as parents is our children also help us to really even find out who we are, because they're going to help us think more about who we are. And children tend to make our lives very real from the perspective if we're looking and seeing what's happening. As we think about training up a child, it's interesting to look what was commanded in the Old Testament, and going back to Deuteronomy 6. Now this is the commandment, the statutes, and the rules the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land to which you are going to possess, that you may fear the Lord your God, you and your sons' sons, by keeping all the statutes, his commandments, which I command you, all the days of your life, that your days may be long. It's interesting here that he mentions the sons and the sons' sons here, because as we then look further in Deuteronomy 6, we then see him giving instruction and trying to teach. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on your doorposts of your house and on your gates. I think it's interesting, two things here. One, he talks about that as far as this needed to be on the heart of the Israelites. And then it talks about just as they go throughout their lives trying to teach their children, talking about when you sit in your house or when you walk by the way or when you lie down or when you rise up. Many of the teaching moments that we have with children aren't planned. But it's going through life intentionally, and when we see those moments, taking the time to try and apply life's lessons and pointing out God and his right ways to our children. In Deuteronomy 6:20 and 25, it says, when your sons ask you in time to come, what is the meaning of the testimonies and the statutes and the rules the Lord our God has commanded you? Then you shall say to your son, we were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt, and the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. And the Lord showed us signs and wonders, great and grievous, against Egypt and against Pharaoh and all his household before our eyes. And he brought us out from there, that he might bring us in and give us the land that he swore to our fathers. And the Lord commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God, for our good always, that he might preserve us alive, as we are this day. And it will be righteousness for us, if we are careful to do all this commandment before the Lord our God, as he has commanded us. As we think about what's here in this passage and what God was trying to accomplish, it points out the goodness of God, it points out the commandments of God, and as we think about what we're trying to teach our children, we're trying to teach them that there is a God that made the whole world. We seek to teach them that we serve a loving God and that his commands are for our best interest. And we're trying to teach them that we were made to worship God, and we've got to make sure that we're seeking to worship God because he's the only one that's worthy of our devotion. Matthew 22:37 through 40, and he said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment, and the second is like to it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. And so as we seek to be pleasing to God, we're putting him first in our life, and we're seeking to live a life also that looks out for others and cares for others. Our ultimate goal is to help our children develop their heart to love God, his word, and his will. If God has the heart of our children, it will be evident in their lives. As we're seeking to train up our children, the biggest challenge is trying to help their hearts grow toward God and helping them to seek God in their life, because if God has their heart, he'll have their life. Proverbs 4:23, keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the springs of life. As we look at the next section, the way he should go, we see in Proverbs use the words way and path. Path is used 29 times. Way is used 81 times. And so this is a frequent theme mentioned throughout the book because there are two paths. There's the paths of righteousness and there's the path of evil. Proverbs 2:20, keep the paths of righteousness. Proverbs 4:11, I have led you in the path of uprightness. Proverbs 4:14, do not enter the path of the wicked. Proverbs 4:18, but the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn. Proverbs 4:26, ponder the path of your feet. Proverbs 10:17, whoever heeds instruction is on the path of life. And the path of righteousness is life. Proverbs 12:2. The path of life leads upward for the prudent, that he may turn away from Sheol beneath. Proverbs 15:24. Proverbs 1:5, my son, do not walk in the way with them. Proverbs 2:20, so you will walk in the way of the good. Proverbs 8:20, I will walk in the way of righteousness. Proverbs 8:32, blessed are those who keep my ways. The way of the Lord is the stronghold to the blameless. Proverbs 10:29, and the way of the fool is right in his own eyes. Proverbs 12:15. But the way of the wicked leads them astray. Proverbs 12:26. Righteousness guards him who is blameless. His way is blameless. Proverbs 13:6. There was a way that seems right to a man, but the end is death. Proverbs 4:12. We've got two choices in life. We're trying to seek righteousness, but there is evil. Jesus said in Matthew 6:19 through 24, Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust does destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where the thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body, so if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for he will either hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Jesus was trying to point out here that there's two paths. We're going to either seek righteousness or we're going to follow after the things of this world. And so we're trying to help our children seek the paths of righteousness. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. So one of the key ways that we teach our children is by our example. It's a key way that children learn. As we think about that, I want to kind of contrast two songs. If you're my age, you've probably heard Cats in the Cradle. A child arrived the other day. He came to the world in the usual way. But there were planes to catch and bills to pay. He learned to walk while I was away. And he was talking before I knew it. And as he grew, he said, I'm going to be like you, Dad. You know I'm going to be like you. My son turned 10 just the other day. He said, thanks for the ball, Dad. Come on, let's play. Can you teach me to throw? I said, not today. I've got a lot to do, he said. That's okay. And he walked away, but his smile never dimmed. And he said, I'm going to be like him. Yeah, you know I'm going to be like him. Well, he came home from college just the other day. So much like a man, I just had to say, son, I'm proud of you. Can you sit for a while? He shook his head and he said with a smile, well, I'd really like, Dad, is to borrow the car keys. See you later. Can I have them, please? I've long since retired. My son moved away. I called him up just the other day. I said, I'd like to see you if you don't mind. He said, I'd love to, Dad. I just can't find the time. You see, my new job's a hassle and the kids have the flu, but it's sure nice talking to you, Dad. It's been so nice talking to you. As I hung up the phone, it had to occur to me, he'd grown up to be just like me. My boy was just like me. Now, to contrast that song, I want to be just like you. Lord, I want to be just like you because he wants to be just like me. I want to be a holy example for his innocent eyes to see. Help me be a living Bible, Lord, that my little boy can read. I want to be just like you because he wants to be just like me. But I'm trying so hard to learn from the best, being patient and kind, filled with your tenderness, because I know that he'll learn from the things that he sees, and the Jesus he finds will be the Jesus in me. Right now, from where he stands, I may seem mighty tall, but it's only because I'm learning from the best Father of them all. I think these songs are quite a contrast as we think about the ways of the world and trying to be seeking to be more like Christ in our life, understanding that our children learn by example. As thinking more about example, children learn by imitation. From an early age, children naturally observe and imitate their parents. They tend to mirror their parents' behaviors, values, and attitudes. If a parent models kindness, responsibility, and respect, the child is likely to adopt those traits. Our example also builds trust and credibility. When parents practice what they teach, it strengthens the credibility of their words. For example, if parents encourage honesty but is dishonest, it creates confusion. It undermines the lesson. Consistent actions reinforce the message. It establishes norms and values. Parents shape a child's understanding of right and wrong. When a parent consistently demonstrates ethical behavior, children learn to internalize those values as part of their moral framework. Also provides emotional security and connection. Children look to their parents as their first source of emotional security. Positive behaviors such as showing empathy, patience, and resilience help children develop emotional regulation and social skills. It's also a foundation for social learning. A parent's example sets the foundation for how children interact with others. Social behaviors like cooperation, shared respect often are learned first at home through parent-child relationships. It influences long-term behavior. Children are more likely to carry forward the habits and values they observe in their parents into adulthood. This long-term modeling can affect everything from work ethic to relationships. Someone could read Proverbs 3, 1 through 6. Proverbs 3, 1 through 6.
My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments, for the length of days and years of life, and peace they will add to you. Let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. So you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths.
All right, thank you. So we want to help our children build faith and learn how to be pleasing to God in all things. As we think about that, it goes back to what we looked at before in the scripture from Matthew about, we want to first love God, and then second, also make sure that we're loving others. And I think Matthew 12 is a key passage. This even points out numerous things about how we try to live a life that is honoring God as well as being respectful of others. And Romans 12, 1 and 2 says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And I think it's interesting as you then go further down into Romans 12, the concepts that follow there. We see in Romans 12, it says to do not think more highly of ourselves than we should. It says to think with sober judgment. It says to let love be genuine. It says to abhor evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Not slothful in zeal. Fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Patient in tribulation. Constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Show hospitality. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty. Associate with the lowly. Never be wise in our own sight. Do not repay evil for evil. Bless and do not curse those who persecute us. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Do what is honorable in the sight of all. As far as it depends on us, live peaceably with all. I think Romans 12 just reemphasizes what Jesus had taught us, how that we want to make sure that we're worshiping God, and part of that includes making sure that we're living right with our fellow man. Colossians 3 are also good things as we think of as we're trying to teach our children. Put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other, as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body. And be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. And whatever you do, in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord, not as for men, knowing that from the Lord you have received the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. As we look at the parable of the sower, we've mentioned before that, we're going to try and teach our children, we're trying to train our children the way of the Lord, but that doesn't mean they're going to follow that way. And the parable of the sower points out that we sow the word, but it's going to have different effects. We see that there's the rocky soil where it grows for a while and then it's killed off. And we see the thorny soil that has challenges. Here, the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is what was sown along the path. As for what was sown on the rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself, but endures for a while. And when tribulation or persecution arise on account of the word, immediately he falls away. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. As for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it. He indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, and in another 60, and in another 30. Our children need faith, so that way they'll have strong roots, so in times of persecution or trial, they can make it through. Our children also need a focus on the things that are above to avoid having their faith choked out by the things in the world. An interesting example, trying to think from a physical perspective, I want to think about a sailboat for a moment. A boat has a keel. Anybody know what the purpose of the keel of the boat is? Balance and keep from slipping. So that way when the wind's there, it's not going to be just pushed back and forth. And so I kind of think of the keel as, we want our children to have faith, because that faith is kind of the keel for them in their lives, that it's going to help them maintain their position. And the other thing is the sail on the sailboat. A sailboat, even if the wind's coming directly at it, a good person who knows how to use a boat, they may have to go in a zigzag pattern, but they can still get where they want to get to, even if the wind is coming directly at them, because they know how to trim their sails. And so we're trying to teach our children, too, how to use godly living to help them keep focused. And so if we help them understand the concepts and help them keep their focus on God, they're going to have the skills they need so that when life is coming at them, they can continue to keep their focus on God and His Word and His will for their life. An interesting quote: "The direction of the craft is not determined by the breeze, but the trim of the sail. In a sense, Godward orientation is like a set of the sail in a child's life. Whatever the shaping influence of life, it is the child's Godward orientation that determines his response to those shaping influences." That's from Shepherding a Child's Heart. Does anybody have any comments to this point? Okay. As we think about our children's lives and also think about the fact that they're going to come in many challenges, and the same thing also the fact that, we try and teach them, but once again, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to follow that. James chapter 1, looking at verses 12 through 18. "Blessed is the man who reigns steadfast under trial. For when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, 'I am being tempted by God.' For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brothers. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures." Where does temptation come from? Satan? Okay. Where else does it come from? What's going to allow us to be tempted? What is really going to be the cause of us being able to be tempted by something?
It's our own desires.
Our own desires. And so the challenge for us, once again, is we're trying to help shape our child's heart and trying to help them have a desire for God's word and God's will. Because at the end of the day, yes, Satan's going to be throwing temptation at us, but it's what is it that we're desiring? Are we desiring the things of God? Are we desiring the things of the world? And so much of it is once again, we're trying to help teach our children and help mold their heart. Because at the end of the day, it's their heart that we're trying to get to. Yes, we're trying to teach them the difference between right and wrong, but it's trying to get back down to the heart of the matter. And the most important things for our children to understand is there is a God. They've got to make sure we help them to understand there is a God. And try to get them to understand that God loves and cares for them. When we're trying to teach our children, we're trying to teach them things. We're trying to help them understand that these aren't rules that we made. These are rules that God has given us because he loves and cares for us, and trying to help them understand that we're here just trying to help them understand the principles that God has provided. And the other thing is we're trying to teach them to worship God, because if they don't come to worship God, they're either going to worship themselves or they're going to be worshiping things in the world. And so I think these are the kind of the three key things as we think about what we're trying to teach our children, and at the same time, the things we want to make sure that are in our life. There is a God. God loves us and wants what's best for us, and God alone is to be worshiped. Yes?
Comment. Yeah, so I look around the room, and a lot of us here are more or less past the age of raising our children. Not everyone, but a lot of us. And so it has caused me to think then, so what's the application for me specifically? And I would zoom out a little bit and take all of this and apply the word intentionality to it. And I'm struck with verse after verse after verse and passage after passage, how it requires me to be very intentional about what I do, what I say, what I allow in my household, how I act at the office. I have to be very intentional about that. And so while I may no longer be training up my child, I am still in the spotlight in terms of how I interact with others, and the example that I allow people to see. And I'm realizing how intentional I have to be about that.
Yes, good point. And the same thing, too, is that, while many of us may not have children directly still within our households, we've got a lot of children here at Gold Hill. And children are going to see all of our examples, the examples of each one of us. And so it's also important, as we're here together, every time we're together, children are learning from all of our examples collectively. Even though we're not their parents, they're learning from us. And so it's something for us to think about. And even when we're not here and we're out in the world, the children that see us are seeing our example, and it can have an impact. I mean, we want to live lives in such a way that the people in the world are drawn to us and understand there's a difference. I don't think we could have any greater example than for somebody in the world to come up to us. And if you see a worldly person and they see God in your life, and you can imagine them coming up to you and going, there's something different about you, and I want that. Can you imagine that? I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but can you imagine us having a worldly person because they see your example and they're so drawn to it that those are the words that come out of our mouth because they see the difference and they want that in their life. And that's what it means to be light and salt, is for us hopefully put that out there. That's not going to affect everybody like that, because once again, as we looked back in the parable of the sower, some people's lives are going to be touched and some aren't. But that's what we're trying to seek in our lives, is to give that example that's going to draw others to God. Yes? Yep. Extended family. Yes. I mean, a lot of times the children are a lot of times with the grandparents, and the grandparents can have a big impact. I mean, there are a lot of children in our culture that are even being raised by their grandparents because for whatever reason their parents aren't very involved in their lives, and there's a lot of grandparents that are playing that primary caregiver role, as well as a lot of grandparents that might be the only link these children are having to get exposure to God. And once again, it's those, when we have those grandchildren in our lives, we have those opportunities, we have those teaching moments to point out that God cares about them and the way that God would want them to live. Any other comments?
Job's never over until
Yep.
you go back.
Yep.
And when your children are raised, and then if they have children, they're going to be looking to you for, going through what you did with them.
Yep.
And so it's never over. And then, but what a blessing it would be to your children when it's their turn to go through all the crazy of raising children, that, you can still continue to bless the God.
Yes, very good, very good. Very good.
We want to teach our children the truth because they're up against the same, like, three enemies. Like, in early Christian literature, they talk a lot about, and this is kind of like 1 John, but they talk a lot about the devil, the flesh, and the world. And I read an author once, John Mark Comer, who summed it up pretty well. He wrote that the enemy assaults us by forming deceptive ideas, which are lies, right? The father of lies, about who we are and what we need. And then these lies play to our disordered desires, which is the flesh, which are normalized by the fallen world around us. So we as parents are up against that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a challenging world that we live in today. And there are many forms of wickedness and evil that are trying to come after our children. And so there's so many things we're doing to try and hopefully train that mind, and trying to protect them the best that we can, and giving them the tools that they're going to need for life. And the key thing, once again, is coming back to trying to make sure they understand that there is a God, there is good, there is evil, and God wants what's best for them. But it's getting back to that heart. It's trying to train that heart. And also the thing is that there's not just one way to follow, because everybody is different. You can't just do ABC and it's going to work every time and do everything, because part of raising children also is trying to understand where that child is, and trying to understand how you help try and train them, because each and every one of us is different. Each child is different, and so it provides challenges as we're trying to find the path and trying to teach a child. So train up a child in the way he shall go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And once again, this was generally true. It's not always true. We wish that we could just teach our children and provide godly principles and that they would always be faithful, but unfortunately, that doesn't always hold true. Sometimes there are children that do fall away, even though they grow up in a home where God is the most important thing. Sometimes children will turn from that, and all we can do is all we can do. And, we go after it prayerfully, and we try and make sure that we've got the Word, we've got prayer, and we're trying to put God at the center of our lives. Any other comments?
Saying about having to be intentional, and he's kind of past the age of raising up his children, and yet I'm kind of in the thick of it right now and thinking, my son doesn't always want to listen to what I have to say, but if there's another person around that would say the same thing, he'd probably be a lot more open to listen to that person. And so that's where that intentionality really comes into play, because, oh, you're just mom, what do you know? But someone else would know more, and I think that's important to set that example.
Yeah, and sometimes too, we teach our children, and sometimes we get to that stage in life where children start to try and find their way, and sometimes they don't as quickly seek maybe the way we would like for them to go. But there is something to this about when he's old and not depart from it, because we do see cases where children maybe for a period of time rebel, but then as they get older in life, they find their roots and they come back. And so we just don't know as we plant those seeds. Yeah, maybe they do divert, but maybe because we planted those seeds and other things happen in life, they come back and find the path that they need to be on. Because even once again, think about the son who demanded his inheritance and went away, but then he came to himself and he came back. We don't fully know sometimes the seeds that we're planting and what the paths will take for someone, because there are those who depart, but also they come back because they come to their senses and they realize where they came from, and it brings them back at a later point in their life. Any other comments?
You have this newborn baby and they're innocent, and they teach you about potty training and they teach you about feeding training. We don't get ourselves prepared. I know for me, when we were raising our kids, for sin training. All have sinned. Your child is eventually going to sin just like you do.
Yeah.
How are you going to handle that? And I think that was the hard part, because what do you do? And you have to really have some forgiveness, and you have to understand that that's going to happen, and it's going to be in their lives. They're not going to be innocent the rest of their lives, because we all mess up. And I think
grace is important for children to understand.
I apologize. I couldn't hear everybody, so if there's a repeat, I apologize. But this is wisdom, right? It's not a promise. It's not a law, right? But it's a fact that if you don't train the child in the way they should go, you won't get the result you're looking for.
Yep, very good. Going back to what you mentioned about grace, our children need to understand that there is the grace of God. They also understand that we see where we make mistakes, and that we're willing to admit a mistake and move from it, because we're trying to create with our children those open lines of communication where that if there's issues, challenges, whatever it is, ideally we want our children to come to us, talk to us about those things, and it's creating that space of grace that we recognize when things are wrong, but at the same time we extend grace as we're trying to help our children learn. Anything else? To leave a lesson with you and appreciate your time today.